My name is Emma Molls. I'm a publishing librarian with the University of Minnesota Libraries, and I'm happy to join all of you today to talk about content types. So I thought sort of an appropriate way to frame what I will be talking about is a statement I hear frequently from campus researchers who end up either in a consultation with me or emailing me because publishing is attached to my title at the libraries. And that is, it's not really a book or a journal. I think, with Todd's introduction, when we think about content, we think a lot about the different variety of digital formats, video, data, proprietary software, code. And that is very much something that I will touch on today, but I do also want to think about sort of that larger question of content type, which comes along in publishing, which is really this, I have this thing and I don't really know how to describe it because it's not really a journal article or it's not really a book. All right. So just a brief overview of what I do at the University of Minnesota Libraries. So the University of Minnesota has a library publishing program. We are a member of the Library Publishing Coalition. I will say in a lot of ways, the University of Minnesota Libraries publishing program is similar to a lot of other library publishers. So if you are familiar with library publishers, what we do at Minnesota isn't really that much different than the majority of them. If you are unfamiliar with library publishers, I guess I would say, yes, libraries are also publishers. Not all libraries, but many, and it's an increasing field. If you work on the publishing side rather than the library side, I would say take a look at the Library Publishing Coalition website. It's a useful tool to see which libraries are actually creating content. At the University of Minnesota, we are a newer library service. We started in 2014. So we've been going for a few years now, which means a lot of the lessons that we've learned and things that I will share today are things that we had to learn pretty fast and overcome a lot of questions that our authors or editors had. We are campus-based, campus-serving, which means that our primary clients are faculty, researchers, or students on the University of Minnesota campus. That's not true of all of our publications. We also work with scholarly societies to publish their journal or conference proceedings, but the majority of our clients are based at the University of Minnesota. And of course, for those of you in library, this is a familiar way to structure a library service, sort of serve your local community first, and then sort of integrate that into the larger collection of services that are available. We publish open access journals, monographs, conference proceedings, textbooks, and digital works, which I'm using here as shorthand for things that don't necessarily fall into either of those earlier descriptions. And we also connect with libraries-wide expertise. So the University of Minnesota Libraries is not a small library system. We have a lot of services and expertise within our library. That can include archival research, which includes digitization, digital humanities expertise, data repository, media services, which includes video production, as well as subject experts across all disciplines. So in that way, we are very much traditional library. We have a lot of services, and our publishing unit connects with all of those services across the library. So why do researchers come to us? There's many reasons why I end up meeting with a campus researcher, and I say researcher as sort of a shorthand to capture faculty members, non-faculty member researchers, and students. So some researchers come to us because they are actually looking for a publisher. Because everything we publish is open access, typically that's their starting point. I have something that I want to publish and I want it to be open access. They also come to us because they're looking for more control, and what that control is really depends. We do not ask any of our authors or publications to assign copyright to us. So sometimes why they are coming to us is because they want to retain their copyright, sometimes for very specific reasons. They also may just want a stronger voice in the publication process, especially faculty members who have fairly long research and publication history. Sometimes there's something that leaves a bad taste in their mouth with working with a previous publisher. It is often actually decisions about what goes on their book cover. So for those of you working in book publishing, that is really something that faculty members feel strongly about. It's often because it's related to student or coursework. So faculty members who are setting up a journal that they want students to serve on the editorial board for in order to get real hands-on editorial experience. And then, of course, which is related to today's talk, they're looking to publish a new content type. Um, this can be something like a faculty member has said to me before, I really wish every journal had video abstracts for the articles. And sometimes they come to us because they want to make that happen. And it's something that they feel as a reader, it would really be great if a publisher provided this specific thing for me. And so they want to make it happen. Um, it can also be because of there are some publishers out there who sometimes request that institutions provide some things for the publication. So I recently had a faculty member come to Publishing Services who said, my publisher said I can include a video alongside of my published monograph, but that video needs to be hosted and preserved with a stable URL at my home institution. So that was really like looking for a service that was already connected to an existing publication. And they came to us because they needed answers, and the publisher in this particular instance didn't really have any more guidance or advice. They said, perhaps your institution can help you. And sometimes it's because they've been turned away from previous publishers. So this is oftentimes when a researcher is looking to do something new in terms of what the content is. So many times researchers come to the library and to me asking questions about, I've really only published before in my discipline, my specific discipline. I know what the journals are in there. I'm very familiar. I'm a reader. I use all of those journals, but now I'm maybe edging a little bit out of my discipline. So working perhaps on the first time for interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary research work, and they don't know where to publish. So they often have questions. Of course, a lot of those results in us as a publisher not becoming their publisher, but helping connect them with existing publications or publishers. So when we meet with researchers, when I meet with researchers, and oftentimes it's a fairly simple forward reference interview, which librarians are very familiar with. It's oftentimes me connecting researchers with another expert, whether that's on campus or with a publisher itself. But sometimes that does lead to us taking on new publications as a publisher ourselves. So when we work through the consultation and selection process for our publications, we're looking for some things that might be a little bit different than other large scale or traditional publishers. We're really looking for mission and vision alignment from the authors or editors or the publication itself with the university and with the library. This is mostly strategic, right? So since all of our content is open access, we don't charge article processing fees either. So we need to really make sure that things that we are publishing have some sort of mission alignment, so we can make sort of the argument every year of why we should continue to exist as a program. So a lot of times we're looking for that. That's actually really easy for us to do. Research is obviously a value of the university, and high quality research is. Oftentimes publications are really specific in why they need that content to be open access. So that's something that we can align very easily with the mission and value. We're looking for the impact of the open access content itself. So why is it especially important that this is open access? Typically editors or authors of the publications we publish have a very good argument as to that. We're also looking for what can we in publishing support, both technology wise and labor wise. We have a number of publishing platforms that we use that we know their capabilities of. So we use actually a fairly large number depending on what the publication is. But we have access to open journal systems, WordPress, Drupal, bpress, DSpace, Pressbooks, and Manifold. We have publications on all of those things. We know the limits of those, and we know what we can do with each of those. We are also asking authors to describe existing publications that may be similar. We are not interested in reinventing the wheel or building a publication that looks exactly like an existing publication. So we are doing some environmental scan of what is already out there and why is that publication not meeting your need. What is not considered for us, which I think is important when we talk about the variety of content type, is we don't look for market research. We're not interested in, will this thing sell? We're not selling it. We're not looking for a return on investment in the same way that a publisher with a different business model would have to function. And we also are not dictating the measures of success for our publications. This is important, and I think it goes into this conversation about content types. And I'll get back to this point in a second. So to talk about some specific examples real quick, this is a publication that we are actually just in the process of finishing, English Heritage Music Series. So this is a faculty member in music who came to us and said, there's not a place where I can put this type of content that makes sense. It doesn't exist. There are some repositories out there. They don't function very well. They're super hard to find. So this faculty member was working with another researcher and actually going to archives to find handwritten scores of music that it's inaccessible because it exists just in a book somewhere. Handwritten. So they actually took the music, recorded audio files of it, and then did a ton of work. And apologies for those of you who know a lot more about music than I do. They did a ton of work to actually make the score available for all of the different parts of the orchestra that would be performing it. So this was a ton of work. What the content actually ended up resulting in, with the exception of the audio files, were PDFs, which really are not that's exactly what Todd was talking about, and that's a fairly regular known file type. But what that content is a lot different, right? So this was something that they could not find a publisher for. They wanted to make sure that it was open access so anybody could get at this content that's already in the public domain, and that it could be performed by orchestras across the world. So this is one publication that, even though the format itself, PDF, is really a common type, the content, the type of content that it is, which is music and sheet music, is actually fairly unique. Another example of this, which I think goes to show that even though we know how to deal with images and text, often the content of a journal can be a lot different. So this is a journal called Open Rivers, which was originally started as a publication to think specifically about the Mississippi River, which, if you've been to the University of Minnesota, splits campus. The journal has since expanded to think about water in all areas. But this journal, they were looking for something that is accessible to a wide variety of readers. They knew from the get-go that the readers of this journal are not likely to be tenure track professors. They are likely to be the community members who live around the Mississippi River, or in this case, around bodies of water in general. So even though the content itself is text and image based, there's a lot of things that are unique about this journal. The voices that are included are often Indigenous voices, they're community activists, they're artists, which means that as a journal, this kind of occasionally runs into a few struggles. This is not a journal that would ever be able to be indexed in Scopus. It doesn't totally make sense for it to be indexed in Scopus, but the editorial board would not pass Scopus's review, right? They're not necessarily people who have long publication histories. They are not, they may not have PhDs behind their name. So this is really something that, while it may sound familiar or look familiar, actually the content is very different from a traditional peer-reviewed journal. And this is another project that we publish called Smart Politics. It's sort of there's kind of multiple things going on in this screenshot, but in some ways it runs a bit like a newsletter or an editorial piece. But then what also is made up in here is the Minnesota Historical Election Archive, which actually is a database that we published that contains all of the election results from the state of Minnesota for the last 160 years. So this is something that is very different in the type of content format that it is. It's a gigantic database. So this is another instance of this is something that does not look like text and images. The database and it's sort of the relations that the database displays is unique in itself. So a few things that we've learned in kind of thinking about content and possibly new types of content is that when researchers come to us and we are building the publications, researchers are very focused, especially in the early days of building a publication, on innovation. This is actually a bit of a struggle. Sometimes we have researchers who come to us and say, I have this vision in my mind, but I don't have the words to describe it. Could you build it? No, it's very hard to build a publication, obviously, if words cannot describe it. So what we really have to do as publisher is kind of sometimes bring them down to an expectation that makes more sense, which really can help when we talk about policies of the publication, whether it's something that's more serial or something that's more like a one-off publication, like a book, is to develop clear policies for what are the expectations for authors, for reviewers, for readers. I think one of the things that we think about and sometimes is lost in our initial conversations of, I want something that is edgy and groundbreaking, is that if you're recruiting content for something that is a serial, the authors need a reason to publish there. One of our biggest challenges, actually, in working with researchers on our own campus is that their goal for publishing something is often in order to get promotion or tenure. And what is in our promotion and tenure policies is pretty simply, it's the description of what you should be publishing is fairly simple. And more than that, people on researchers on the promotion and tenure track are often looking to, well, I know if I publish a book, if I publish so many journal articles in these specific journals, I have a good chance of getting promotion and tenure. So we often have that conflict of, I want to be really innovative, but also I need to publish a thing that looks a specific way and is accepted as a specific thing. So that's something that we often have to negotiate out, especially if we're working with a researcher who is already at the top of their field and is tenured. If they're working on a serial, they need to recruit content from people who may not be in that same position of privilege. We also think a lot about building for that first issue. I think for any of you who have done new publication builds, this is fairly common thinking of, let's get that first issue out. Let's build around some ability to grow, but let's try not to throw every new piece of technology at the first issue or the first edition to begin with. One of the things I think that happens a lot is, especially for things that are serial, is that people will submit what they see. So depending on what's in that first issue, it's really going to dictate what the journal or serial publication gets later on. We develop roadmaps or wish lists. So when we are building that first issue, if then the editor says, well, in the future, it would be great if we could, whatever that is, have video abstracts, if we could publish large data sets, if they could post original code, we work on that more in a roadmap, and we also work directly with our platforms. Some of our platforms are community developed, they're community governed. So to be able to work directly with the technology that we're using to say, it would be great if it could do this, is really an advantage that we have. It also, because a lot of our platforms are community developed, means that we don't necessarily have to go down that road alone. We integrate with other library services. This is probably the most important one. So if someone has a video that they need hosted somewhere, we have a campus unit that can actually do that. So making sure that we are aware of all of the services around us is incredibly helpful. We also do a lot of, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I think that goes to kind of saying that a lot of editors have really kind of lofty goals. And, well, I want to be able to publish 3D data sets. Sometimes it's like, okay, well, let's see if you ever get one before we develop a whole process around that. And finally, the last thing that I want to say is, for me as a librarian who is a library publisher, I am always a librarian, which means that some of the things I am thinking about right away, even at initial consultations, is can we preserve this content and will a user find this content? We work directly with in-house catalogers, and this is a huge advantage to being a library publisher, to help make things discoverable. We're thinking right away about our own library systems. is a user going to find this in our catalog? Yes or no, could they ever find it in our catalog? We also follow standards, but we push for change. I think this is one of the hardest things. You know, we want clean metadata. We want something that should have an ISSN to have an ISSN. We want something that should have an ISBN to have an ISBN. But sometimes we're pushing up on those limits of, you know, this really doesn't make sense for this to have an ISSN. It's probably not going to be approved for one. So we're really in constant conversation with some of those standard organizations to think about, you know, this really isn't working for us. What can we get to Portico? Why should we send things to Portico, et cetera? So it's a lot of continuous thinking about needs for change. And then the final thing that I want to say is that our publications serve the needs of specific communities, which means that our publications define their own success. This, I think, is really important when we think about diversity of content. You know, in some ways, I think it's that question of even if we can, should we? And for that, we really turn to the editors or main authors of our publications to think, you know, to ask, what is it that you need this publication to do? If sometimes the answer to that is fairly simple and can be that goal can be met by just publishing text, then let's publish text. If your goal really needs to be met by having something that is advanced, totally new, a file format that we've never dealt with before, then let's figure that out together. But we always need to know at the end of the day, how are you going to know if this thing is successful? We don't want to build a journal that publishes you know, some really kind of out of scope digital format if nobody's ever going to read it, or no one's ever going to want to publish there because they don't understand what they're looking at. So we're always thinking about those goals. Thank you. I think that's all I have for my presentation.